The polished chrome wheels of the bespoke racing green wheelchair shone brightly. Under the gentle light of 1,000 candles that were hanging from the ceiling, as Elias maneuvered the aisle that was covered in petals, a murmur that was rich with appreciation and compassion reverberated across the collection of people that had gathered. Everyone was aware of the narrative, which included the inspiring architect, the catastrophic bike accident that occurred 6 months earlier, and the gloomy prediction that walking without assistance may take years, if it ever happened at all. Although his wide shoulders were able to fit the cut tuxedo jacket in midnight blue, his legs, which were concealed by a pristine linen drape, were a mute witness to the battle that he had been going through. The image of Aurora, a beauty in flowing ivory silk embellished with beautiful embroidered wildflowers that nearly seemed like they were alive, waited at the end of the flowery archway. They were captivated by Elias, glistening with tears that had not yet been shed, tears that were not tears of grief, but tears of strong, unyielding pride. She saw the lines of strain that were very familiar to her around his eyes, the little tremble that was there in his hands as they gripped the wheel rims, and the intense concentration that was carved on his attractive face. It was clear to her that he was engaged in an unseen conflict inside himself at that particular time. The whispers were harder to hear. The poor Elias. Such bravery. Aurora is that kind of a saint. It was a guy who was forever wedded to wheels, marrying the lady who loved him regardless of the circumstances. This was the idea that hung thick in the scented air. As Elias positioned his chair next to Aurora, the officiant, a kind-hearted lady who was familiar with their path, smiled at him in a way that was both soft and encouraging. The ceremony got underway. Not only were pledges made, but also war cries that were developed in the comfort of the hospital and during treatment sessions were spoken. The voice of Aurora, which was clear and powerful, resounded with a love that had been strengthened by the fact that they had been through similar challenges. Elias, I choose you not because of the mountains we climb, but because we climb them together. Each and every breath, and each and every dream that seems unachievable, the time has finally arrived. With a tone that was both warm and official, the officiant turned her attention to Elias and said, "And do you, Elias, feel that Aurora is your lawfully wedded wife? To love her, to comfort her, to honor and to keep her in sickness and in health, for as long as you both shall live, for as long as you both shall live." It was a profound hush that fell, one that went beyond simple quiet. It was a communal suspension of breath and a suspension of hearts that caused the hush. Elias looked directly into Aurora's eyes. In that look poured a whole history, the anguish of broken bone and torn nerves. The agonizing hours of electrostimulation that felt like being flayed alive, the despair that threatened to overwhelm him, and the persistent fire Aurora had lighted in his spirit. Even before he moved, he was able to perceive her trust, which was a real force that held him erect. "I do." His voice, which was powerful and resonant, reverberated across the silence. The subsequent events, however, were the ones that caused the environment to become shattered. Elias might have remained sitting, but instead he positioned his hands firmly on the cushioned armrests of the wheelchair. Because of the tension, his knuckles quickly went white. It was clear that he was shaking, first in his arms and then in his core. As a collective sound, the visitors let out a gasp, expressing their disbelief and perplexity. Aurora did not flinch, despite the fact that her stare remained fixated on his, serving as a beacon of unwavering conviction. Elias started to pressure the situation with a grunt that was a combination of exertion and defiance. During the agonizing months of neuromuscular retraining and biofeedback treatment, the muscles that had been painstakingly rebuilt from the ground up shouted in protest. Instantaneously, beads of sweat formed on his forehead, just underneath the beautifully groomed hair he wore. A wheelchair, which was a representation of his limitations, turned out to be his anchor and his launch pad. He stood up. This was not done in a fast or elegant manner. Rather, it was done with a horrible and awe-inspiring slowness that kept the whole church hostage. From one torturous inch to the next, he began to pull himself higher. The linen drape was removed, exposing the sleek carbon fiber braces that were encasing his legs. These braces were not cages, but rather exoskeletons of pure willpower of the individual. His frantic breathing and the faint buzz of the brace's microhydraulics activating to support him were the only things that could be heard throughout the quiet, which had now become electric. A ship in a storm, he wavered, his face carved with the immense effort that he had put out. There was a natural inclination for Aurora to extend her hand, but she stopped herself just an inch away. It was his mountain to climb, and it was his triumph that he needed to claim. The ocean of love that he saw in her eyes provided him all the strength he needed to meet her gaze once again. Elias finally rose to his feet in front of his wife, shaking but standing firmly. Although he was exerting himself to the point that every fiber in his body was quivering with the effort, he was exuding a victory that was so deep that it appeared to brighten the area around him. Aurora was overcome with a quiet cascade of happiness and vindication as tears flowed freely down her cheeks at this moment. In spite of the fact that her own eyes were wide with surprise, the officiant was able to recover sufficiently to murmur, "You may kiss the bride." The prodding was unnecessary for Elias. He reached for Aurora with a movement that was less of a stride and more of a controlled tumble forward, driven by his intense want to be with her. His arms, which had been strengthened by months of spinning and lifting weights, encircled her waist and gently pulled her against him for the purpose of achieving balance and falling in love. She approached him from the side, her hands gently cupping his face. Their kiss was more than just a way to mark their commitment to one another. It was also a celebration of resiliency and a demonstration of the human spirit's unwillingness to be defined by that which is broken. It was powerful, tender, and had a little bit of a salty flavor from the tears that they had mixed together. Elias pressed his forehead against Aurora's as they parted ways, still holding each other closely. His voice was a raw, private whisper that somehow made its way to the front rows of the audience. "For you," he said. "At all times, for you." He didn't simply mean standing. He meant every arduous hour of treatment, every moment of overcoming despair, and every breath taken with her as his goal. He meant all of these things. The chapel exploded in flames. The audience responded, not just with applause, but also with a resounding, cathartic scream of shouts, tears, and uncontrollable sobbing of ecstasy. The first premise, which was the story of the groom who was tragically constrained, had been smashed in the same dramatic manner that Elias had shattered his own imagined restrictions. The aisle had not been traversed by him. There, he had triumphed over it. Aurora had not only been wedded to him, but he had also defied gravity and expectations by standing tall to meet her as an equal partner. This was the most deep confession of love that could possibly be imagined. Later on, while they were dancing for the first time, Elias utilized a sleek and minimalist walker. His movements were slow and deliberate, and Aurora flawlessly matched his pace while laying her head on his shoulder. There was a green wheelchair sitting nearby. It was no longer a representation of captivity. Rather, it was a quiet witness to a miracle that was brought about by love, cutting-edge medical, and a resolve that was as unyielding as titanium. They did not dance on a flawless floor, but rather on the ground that they had laboriously gained together, which was an astonishing triumph. A guy who was confined to a wheelchair was not the subject of the tale that was being whispered at this moment. Rather, it was about a love that was so strong that it physically raised him to his feet.